We have a 2007 Mac Pro that was purchased on eBay. You can tell by the looks this computer has been through the ringer. Even the Apple logo has fallen apart. But let's see if we can restore this computer back to its former glory. After installing a fresh version of OS X El Capitan, I ran Geekbench 4, which was the latest supported version for this operating system. I noticed immediately that this computer had some major thermal issues, probably due to it not being cleaned in the last 12 years. But notice that this test took 12 minutes and 52 seconds to complete, something I noted. With a pitiful score of 463 on the single core and 457 on the multi-core, this MacBook Pro is not performing like it should. So I tried to run the latest version of Final Cut Pro for El Capitan and noticed that the CPU was overheating, so much that a simple background render was causing the computer to lock up. While checking the temperatures, I noticed the computer would climb over 109 to 110 Celsius for the CPU, thus making me stop this test and concerned that I would permanently damage the computer. Let's start by opening up the computer. These 2007 non-unibody Mac Pros have an interesting design for the time. You want to start by placing the computer on its back and using your fingers to push both battery release tabs away from the battery and lifting the battery out of the computer. You're going to remove 3 identical Phillips screws from the memory door. It's a good time to think about where you want to place your screws since we're going to have lots before we're done. Lift the memory door up enough to grip it and slide it towards you, pulling it away from the casing. Now I'm going to remove the 1GB memory stick that came with the computer. You're going to have to press on the side of the metal levers to slide the RAM chip out from its compartment. Then you will remove the 10mm T6 Torx screw on either side of the RAM slot. Now you're going to remove the following 4 14.5mm Phillips screws along the hinge. I almost forgot to mention to remove the 2 2.8mm Phillips screws in the battery compartment near the latch. Go ahead and remove these now. Now we're going to remove the 4 3.2mm Phillips screws on the side of the computer. Once again, please make note of where you are placing these screws. You will thank yourself when the time comes to reassemble the machine. Then, you will rotate the computer to the other side to remove another set of 4 3.2mm Phillips screws. Then rotate to the rear of the computer and remove 2 more 3.2mm Phillips screws. If you're keeping score, you should have a total of 10 Phillips screws now. Now we have removed all the screws that were holding the upper case cover. We're going to lift up at the rear of the case and work away along the sides, freeing the case as you go. Once you have freed the sides, you may rock the case up and down to free the front. There are 4 plastic clips around the DVD slot and another above to the left of the IR sensor that can be difficult to disengage without prying. A quick reassembly tip: there are 2 clips located by the center of the DVD tray that will rarely snap back into place properly without help. Support the frame by inserting a plastic spudger into the DVD slot directly underneath the clip's location and then press firmly down until you hear a snap. Now disconnect the trackpad and keyboard ribbon cable from the logic board and remove the tape as necessary. Remove the following 4 screws. The 2 3.3mm silver Phillips screws on either side of the super drive. Use the flat end of the spudger to disconnect the orange super ribbon cable from the logic board. Then remove 1 4.7mm silver T6 Torx screw from the top left corner of the drive, and 1 6.2mm black Phillips screw at the top right corner of the drive. Then lift the optical drive up and out of the computer. Now disconnect the eyesight and display data cable from the logic board by sliding them straight back out of their connector. Remove the 3 9.4mm silver T6 Torx screws securing the right logic board fan, then remove the silver 9.5 6T Torx screw securing the ground loop in the display data cable to the casing. Hold the logic board down with one hand and use your other to lift up the fan from its housing. Remove the two 8.2mm T6 Torx screws securing the hard drive training bracket to the lower case. Use a spudger if the hard drive ribbon cable is firmly glued to the top of the drive. You might have to work slowly in order to not damage it. Lift the hard drive retaining bracket up and out of the computer. Lift up the hard drive with one hand and use your other hand to disconnect the hard drive cable. Remove two silver T6 6mm Torx screws from the left side of the hard drive. We'll be transferring these screws to the new SSD. Now I disconnected the hard drive and the express card connector from the left side of the logic board. Then I removed four more 9.4mm silver T6 Torx screws securing the left fan, and disconnected the eyesight cable from the logic board by sliding the cable to the left and out of its connector. Then I hold down the logic board with one hand and I use my other hand to lift up the fan from its housing. Now you're going to remove 8 4.7mm silver T6 Torx screws securing the logic board to the lower case, one 4.4mm black Phillips screw securing to the right of the RAM slot, and one 6.2mm black T6 screw on the right side of the left fan. Disconnect all 8 connectors by placing a spudger beneath each one and lifting up. Use care when disconnecting some of the smaller connectors. A forceful pry with the spudger may accidentally break them off the logic board. Then lift up the left side of the logic board and disconnect the gray and black power cable from the bottom of the board. Pull the power connector parallel to the face of the logic board. Grasp the board at the left side and at the thin section and rotate the logic board out of the lower case. Notice that the thermal paste left over has aged and crusted over time. Not only will I be giving the logic board a well-deserved cleaning, but I'll be replacing the old crusty paste with a new one to improve on the machine's thermal performance. Now to free up the LCD screen, you're going to disconnect 2 or 3 antenna cables attached to the Airport Extreme card. Reroute the Airport antenna cables from their channels in the left speaker. Then remove the inverted cable from the left I/O board by placing a smudger beneath the cable and lifting up. Then remove 3 T6 Torx screws holding the display hinge down to the chassis. Repeat the process to the right side by removing 3 more T6 Torx screws, freeing up the display. Now, with the LCD display freed up, let's take a closer look at the Apple logo. Looks like I'll have to take a closer look inside to see what's wrong with it. Now remove the 4.5mm Phillips screws from the lower left and the lower right of the display. Insert the flat end of the spudger perpendicular to the face of the display between the plastic strips. Attach the rear of the bezel and the front of the bezel. With the spudger inside, rotate it away from the display and separate the front and the rear bezel. Work along the right edge of the display until the rear bezel is evenly separated from the front bezel. Now you're going to repeat the process by prying the rear bezel away from the front bezel to slightly separate the bottom, the left, and the top edges of the rear display bezel. Work along the lower edges of the rear bezel until everything's separated. Now let's lift the LCD screen up and away from the rear display bezel and take a closer look. Well, it looks like the Apple's logo sticker on the back of the rear case is separated. Let's clean this up and stick it back on. Now let's give this rear case a good cleaning. You want to make sure you remove any dirt and grime before you apply any adhesive onto it again. 70% rubbing alcohol, I gave the rear case a good cleaning just before I re-glued the Apple sticker back on. Now I applied glue on top of where the old adhesive was, going around the Apple logo, and then reapplied the sticker, making sure the glue is distributed evenly. Now if you look on the other side of the rear case, you will see a new shiny Apple logo. Now a quick cleaning of the rear case with 70% rubbing alcohol to give it that brand new shine. A quick spray and cleaning of the LCD screen is next. Now to improve on thermals, I removed that old crusty thermal paste with some rubbing alcohol. Then a quick wipe down of the exhaust fans to make sure there's no grime and dust. With a clean chassis and heatsink, we can reinsert it into the computer now. Now using 70% rubbing alcohol, I removed the old crusty thermal paste from the CPU and GPU. Now we're going to reapply a fresh coat of thermal paste to the CPU and GPU to improve thermals. Now let's reconnect the inverter cable and reroute the Airport antenna cables. Then you're going to snap the 3 cables back into the Airport Extreme. Let's now open up the right side CPU fan and give it a proper cleaning. This is most likely the first time this fan has ever been opened to be cleaned. I also blew some compressed air to make sure there were no lingering dust bunnies before I reassembled it again. Now let's reattach the right side CPU fan to the logic board. I'm going to replace the original 120GB Fujitsu Apple hard drive that came with the computer with a 120GB Samsung Evo solid state drive for better performance. After installing the Samsung Evo SSD, I cleaned and reinstalled the left CPU fan and the CD-ROM drive. Now let's go ahead and reinstall the RAM. I originally planned on upgrading this computer to 4 gigs, but for whatever reason it would not boot with 2 gigs in each DIMM slot, forced me to just upgrade one of the sticks to 2 for a total of 3 gigs. Now with the computer fully reassembled, let's reinstall Mac OS X El Capitan onto the new solid state hard drive. After installing the new operating system, I reran Geekbench to see the fruits of my labor, and wow, at just 4 minutes and 20 seconds to complete the benchmark, I definitely noticed this restoration was successful. With an amazing new score of 1429 on the single core and 2155 on the multi-core, this computer has nearly quadrupled its CPU performance. Also noticing that my thermal performance was no longer an issue, this mainly due to the cleaning of the internals and replacement of thermal paste. Well, thanks for watching, hope you liked my video, and until the next restoration.